Is one of the charities that I've spoken to, their lawyers are actually looking into the detail right now, and they're actually taking the government to court on another policy, the Rwanda policy, that sees people make asylum claims in the East African country. That's going through the courts right now, a judgment to come in September. But both policies speak to the broader Home Office strategy of deterring people before making that journey here. Small boat crossings, we know, has been a focus for the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, the current Home Secretary. Reportedly, it's at the top of the list in the whiteboard in her department. And I put it today to a Tory MP who apparently has secured a place in a Liz Truss cabinet to say, has she expedited her own policy, this policy today? They say that's unlikely. It's actually widely supported within the party. Many other MPs will agree with that, and it's been in the works for ages. Whether it works in practice, well, that's a challenge for the new Home Secretary and also for the new Prime Minister.
Sarina Barker-Singh, thanks very much indeed. Well, in a moment, we'll be talking to Conservative member of the Home Affairs Committee, Tim Lawton. But first, I'm joined by Daniel Sahaji from the anti-child trafficking charity Love 146, which works directly with Albanian trafficking survivors. Daniel, thanks very much for coming on the programme. I mean, as we saw in Porrick's report and also Sarina's report, this primarily seems to be a problem about trafficking gangs working out of the UK, bringing people over from Albania, rather than Albanians leaving Albania because it's a miserable place to live, life's unbearable or it's insecure. How would you tackle that particular problem then?
Well, part of the issue is that it's not just Albanian gangs in the UK, it's Albanian gangs actually in Albania, obviously, and they have very close ties to the state at times. So you need to look at the causes of that. Poverty is obviously a major cause of exploitation and drives people into it. So trying to tackle it by telling people don't come doesn't really make a difference to them, because as your reporter said before, 53% of asylum claims from Albanians are found to be successful. So we are seeing people who have legitimate reasons to claim asylum. And you need to focus on that side of it so that you can then start tackling the trafficking gangs at source as well and finding ways to protect those who need it.
But you're protecting them from a terrible fate, working effectively in modern slavery in the UK by keeping them in the UK and giving them asylum in this country.
By protecting them in the UK and giving them asylum, you can actually help to reduce how the gangs have a grip on them. So if you are telling people that if you come forward and you've been trafficked, you come forward, you will be arrested, the gangs then can use that to say, if you go forward, you will be arrested and deported. Now, returning somebody who's been trafficked to Albania puts them at risk of re-exploitation, because the gangs who trafficked them in the first place still want to get their money's worth. If you provide them with asylum, then they can potentially get support through organisations like Love 146 or any other ones, which can then help to remove them from that system of exploitation.
And how do you explain this extraordinary 100-fold increase from one year to the next? I mean, have the gangs just got much better organised? Has industry picked up again, as it were, their industry after the pandemic? How do you explain it?
There's no one thing, I think that's crucial to say, there's no one thing you can target on it to say that's directly caused it. The pandemic we've seen an increase in referrals to the National Referral Mechanism in the UK, for example. So we are seeing trafficking on the increase in that respect, or more to the point, people being identified as trafficking. So there's an element of that involved in this, that when we have a global pandemic and the cost of living crisis obviously is going global, poverty increases, which makes people more vulnerable to exploitation. These gangs are very clever, they're very astute, and they know who to target and how to target them.
But with a 100-fold... Okay, but with a 100-fold increase, something has to be done, does it not? This is a lot of people are suffering here. It should be stopped. So what's the way to do it?
Nothing. There's no soundbite way to say how to stop it. You need to tackle trafficking at schools, and I think one thing all of us agree on is we need to be tackling the trafficking gangs. That means making it easier for people to come forward, seek support, so that they can then potentially go to the authorities and say, these are the gangs.
Okay.
If you make it harder for them, the gangs operate in silence.
Got to leave it there. Daniel Sahaji, thank you very much indeed. Well, the Home Office gave us a statement earlier claiming that the government has delivered on its promise to the British people to take back control of our immigration system. We did ask to speak to a minister to discuss that assertion, but the department refused to make anyone available to speak on camera today. Well, I'm joined now by the Conservative MP, Tim Lawton, who's a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee and has a constituency on the English Channel. Tim Lawton, thanks for coming on the programme. The government says it is taking back control. From what we saw today in Porrick O'Brien's piece, from the numbers, is clearly not taking back control. And the only reason why that boat was prevented from crossing the channel is because a couple of French police officers slashed the boat with a knife and deflated it.
Shiseido Ultimune, our #1 anti-aging serum. 150 years of Japanese skincare innovation.
I noticed the difference.
Well, the government may be taking back control on paper, but in practice it's clearly not happening because the record numbers coming across the channel just show that. And what is really frustrating is that the record numbers we had in one day earlier this week, over half of them were Albanian. And whether it is for trafficking or through people smuggling, Albania is not a war zone. Albania is not a whole-scale abuser of human rights. And Albania has no particularly close relationship with the UK. So why is it becoming our problem? And that's where I disagree, I'm afraid, with Daniel Sahega. It's not going to help anybody if we give asylum to lots of Albanians who then come here, because it will just attract more to come here. What needs to happen is a greater cooperation with the Albanian authorities, and we've had the announcement today, helping clamp down on this vile trade in people trafficking and people smuggling, and breaking up those criminal gangs and stopping them coming across the channel and making millions out of it, as they are.
But the way to do that is right here in the UK. I mean, this is about law enforcement in the UK, on UK soil, of Albanian contractors or people smugglers who are bringing people over.
Well, it's about two things. It's about better breaking up of the gangs, and there's been a deal of success with that. And as you saw in that report, some of the Kurdish-run gangs, there have been a number of arrests recently, which is partly why the Albanians have stepped in. But there is an easy way to stop this, and that relies on the French. And it's quite extraordinary, the scenes we saw of the French police arriving on the beaches to actually apprehend them, well, not apprehend them, but stop them getting in the water. That's just not happening enough. And if the French were to decide, as they are entitled to, and indeed obliged to under international law, to apprehend, intercept those boats if they are in the water and take the passengers back to France, so that they spend a lot of money paying criminal gangs for a round trip, or you notice when they did puncture that boat, good tactic, brave policemen against a large number of potential migrants there, none of them were arrested. So I'm afraid what will happen, if your reporter's back on that beach tomorrow, you'll probably see the same people with a different boat trying their arm again. And it's really down to the French, as we would do here, to arrest them, to analyse whether they've got any right to be in France in the first place. Many of them will have failed in their asylum applications in France, and to take ownership of that problem rather than try to make it our problem.
Well, I don't know if you noticed in that report, there was a French couple, and they were more or less saying to the police and to the Albanians, off you go, off to the island. I mean, the fact is also that before Brexit, under the Dublin Agreement, it was an awful lot easier to send people back.
Well, it just wasn't, was it? Because if you actually look at the figures, before Brexit, the number of people who were being returned, as a proportion of those coming across the Channel or other routes, was still really, really low. And during the pandemic, the French and the Germans were using that as an excuse, and they actually put a limit on the number we could return under the Dublin
But hardly anyone was travelling during the pandemic.
Which was in single figures. There were a lot of people still travelling during the pandemic, and there were people that we were trying to deport from the pandemic after their asylum claims had been rejected, that they wouldn't let to go back. So let's not try and make up that this is something to do with Brexit. This is down to the French not intercepting those boats in the water and not arresting those people trying to commit a criminal act, which it is, paying people traffickers to come across the Channel to enter the UK legally.
Very briefly, whether it's Rwanda or it's this, the government is throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks when it comes to this policy.
Well, the Rwanda scheme is not the ideal scheme, and it's yet to start, and that's the problem. Now, we need the Rwanda scheme to start to send out a very strong message that actually, if you do pay people smugglers to get into a boat to come across the channel, it's now a complete lottery as to whether you will end up in a hotel in Kent or on a plane to Rwanda. So don't do it. Whatever we think about the claims of various people coming here, and there are some very worthy, deserving cases who, frankly, are being queue-jumped by Albanian economic migrants.
Okay, got to leave it there. Tim Lawton, thanks very much indeed.
There you have it. The French don't plan to do anything, never bet that. They are not stopping them as you think. They punctured one boat to look for Channel 4 News. I'll be back later. Bye guys.